The rain was unforgiving that night. It wasn't just falling, it was pouring, drumming against the windshield like it was angry at the world. Most people sped past, focused on getting home. No one wanted to stop. No one wanted to notice. But Calvin Reed, he did. A man stood on the shoulder of the highway. No umbrella, no hazard lights. Just a broken-down car and a soaked jacket clinging to his frame like it was part of his skin. Calvin was exhausted, just off another 12-hour shift. But something made him pull over. He rolled down the window and asked, "Need a hand?" The man barely looked at him, just nodded. Calvin didn't know his name, didn't ask. He just fixed the tire, gave him a coat, and drove away. No thanks necessary. Just one stranger helping another. In the rain. That was 10 years ago. Now, Calvin's son is fighting for his life. And the hospital bill is more than he could ever afford. He's about to lose everything. Until a mysterious message arrives. Tell him I never forgot what he did in the rain. Subscribe to SoulTwist Stories. Because the moments we think are forgotten are often the ones that save us when we least expect it. It was the kind of rain that made you want to stay inside. Heavy, cold, relentless. But Calvin Reed wasn't the kind of man who had that luxury. He was driving home after a long shift at the packaging warehouse. Hands sore, back tight, uniform damp with sweat and fatigue. All he wanted was to get home, peel off his boots, and tuck his 6-year-old son into bed before midnight. He squinted through the blurry windshield as his wipers struggled to keep up. Then he saw it. A car, pulled off to the side of Route 89. Driver's door open. A man crouched beside the front tire, soaked to the bone, barely visible in the downpour. Everyone else sped past him like he didn't exist. But something in Calvin pulled him to the shoulder. He slowed down, turned on his hazard lights, and pulled over. He rolled down the window and shouted through the storm, "You good out here, man?" The stranger didn't respond at first. Then he stood, tall, quiet, maybe early 30s, face shadowed by the rain. "Flat," he finally said, voice hoarse. "No tools. No spare." Calvin didn't hesitate. He popped his trunk, grabbed his own spare, and knelt beside the man without another word. The rain soaked him instantly, chilling his bones, but he didn't care. They worked in silence. Calvin loosened the bolts, jacked the car, and swapped the tire with a kind of quiet efficiency that only comes from years of doing it for yourself, without anyone to call for help. When it was done, the man finally spoke again. "You didn't have to stop." Calvin just shrugged. Didn't feel right to keep going. The stranger reached into his coat and pulled out a few damp bills. "For your trouble." Calvin stepped back. "Nah, keep it. Just get home safe." They stood there, two men in the rain, strangers connected by a moment neither of them saw coming. No names, no stories, just a look, a nod. And then Calvin was gone, back in his car, heat blasting, hands trembling from the cold. He never told anyone about it. Not his co-workers, not his son, not even himself, really. It was just one of those small moments, the kind you forget, until life reminds you of it in the most unimaginable way. Back in their small 2-bedroom apartment, Calvin's world was quiet. The walls were thin. The ceiling fan clicked when it spun. And dinner was often whatever he could stretch between paychecks. But there was one thing that never felt small in that house. His love for Jalen. Jalen was 6 when the rainstorm happened. Big brown eyes. Curious little mind. He'd ask questions like, "Why do we have to boil water before macaroni?" Or, "Why don't we have a garage like the neighbors?" Calvin never lied. He just knelt down, looked him in the eye, and said, "We don't have everything, buddy. But we've got each other. That's enough for now." Calvin worked 2 jobs. Janitor at Jefferson Middle during the day. Forklift operator in the warehouse at night. He didn't complain. Didn't party. Didn't waste time chasing things that didn't matter. Every second was for Jalen. He packed lunches with sticky notes that said, "Be bold. I'm proud of you. You got this." He showed up to every parent-teacher meeting, even if it meant skipping sleep. He missed meals to afford soccer cleats. He turned down overtime just to hear Jalen read his first book out loud. They weren't rich, but their bond, it was priceless. Sometimes, after Jalen had fallen asleep, Calvin would sit in the quiet kitchen with his cup of instant coffee and think. He'd think about that rainy night, that stranger, that brief moment of kindness that passed like a ghost. He didn't dwell on it. He didn't expect it to mean anything. But somewhere deep down, he hoped that maybe one day, someone would do the same for his son. Not out of duty, but out of the simple belief that we're here to carry each other. Even in the storm, the years moved quietly. No big milestones, no vacations or fireworks, just early mornings, packed lunches, bedtime stories, and love, layered gently, day after day. Jalen grew, and so did the space he took up in Calvin's heart. By the time he turned 12, he was taller than most kids his age. Smart, sharp, kind, just like his father. He had dreams of becoming a mechanical engineer. Not because someone told him to, but because he wanted to build things that lasted. Every science fair, Calvin was there. Even if it meant arriving in a dusty uniform, smelling like bleach and hard work. Every soccer game, Calvin sat on the sidelines, even if he had to nap in the car between shifts just to stay awake. He cheered the loudest, laughed the hardest, and cried quietly the day Jalen was accepted into Brightmoor Tech High School, a charter school across town that only accepted the top 2% of applicants. Calvin was proud, but he also knew this meant even more sacrifices. The bus rides were longer. The tuition wasn't cheap. There were lab fees, supply lists, after-school robotics tournaments. Calvin didn't flinch. He picked up an extra cleaning contract at a law office downtown. He sold his old stereo. He even skipped paying the gas bill 1 month just to afford a second-hand laptop Jalen needed for coding class. When friends asked how he managed, Calvin would just smile and say, "He's my whole world. That's how." And Jalen, he never took it for granted. He never bragged about new clothes. Never asked for Jordans. He used his old phone until the screen was barely holding on. He studied hard, taught other kids how to code, even got a part-time job tutoring younger students after school, so his dad wouldn't have to carry everything alone. They were a team, father and son, backbone and heartbeat, surviving in a world that often forgot people like them. But they never forgot each other. Until one evening, everything changed. A single phone call, a panicked voice, the screech of tires and the shattering of glass. Jalen didn't make it home that night. The day started like any other. A Thursday, cool breeze. Calvin had just finished wiping down classroom floors at Jefferson Middle. He was humming an old Otis Redding tune, thinking about what to cook for dinner. Maybe tuna melt sandwiches. Jalen liked those. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost didn't pick up, but something told him to. "Is this Mr. Calvin Reed?" "Yes. This is City View Hospital. There's been an accident. Your son, Jalen. He's been admitted. You need to come right away." He didn't remember the drive. Didn't remember parking. Didn't even realize he'd left his keys in the ignition. He ran through the hospital doors, shoes squeaking, heart pounding like it was trying to break out of his chest. A nurse met him, tried to talk gently. There was a collision. He was in the back seat of a rideshare. Another driver ran a red light at full speed. The words blurred together. All Calvin could focus on were the machines, the wires, the sound of beeping monitors. Jalen lay unconscious in a hospital bed, his face swollen, his arm in a cast, a breathing tube down his throat. His baby, his boy, the one he'd built his life around. Silent, still, fighting. The doctor pulled Calvin aside. "He has internal injuries. Severe trauma. We'll need to operate quickly. There's a high risk, but without the procedure." Calvin nodded, barely hearing the rest. "How much?" he asked. The doctor hesitated. "The surgery and post-op care, It's not fully covered by your plan. You're looking at around $82,000 out of pocket." Calvin froze. His world, already trembling, collapsed completely. $82,000? He didn't even have $820. He asked about payment plans, funding options, emergency Medicaid. The answers were all the same. Too slow. Too late. The surgery had to happen tonight. Calvin sat in that waiting room, hands clenched, chest heaving, tears spilling down his weathered cheeks. He prayed. He begged. He would have sold his soul if it meant saving Jalen's life. But he had nothing left to give. Nothing but a memory. A memory of one rainy night. And a stranger he never saw again. Calvin sat slumped in a plastic chair, face buried in his hands. The hallway was too bright. Too sterile. The kind of place that made you feel small, like hope didn't belong there. He had no money, no lifeline, and his son was slipping through his fingers. He felt a nurse tap his shoulder. "Mr. Reed, there's someone who just called the billing desk." "Okay." They covered the full cost of the surgery. All of it. Anonymously. "What?" "They left a note for you." She handed him a small folded slip of paper. Plain. No logo. Just a single handwritten line. "Tell him I never forgot what he did in the rain." Calvin's heart stopped. The hospital noises faded. The weight in his chest lifted just slightly, replaced with a memory. That night. The stranger. The tire. The soaking coat and broken silence on Route 89. He never asked his name. Never thought he'd see him again. And yet, here he was. Inside the operating room, Jalen was being prepped for surgery. A second chance at life, paid for by a man whose name Calvin still didn't know. He pressed the note to his chest. He wanted to cry, but mostly, he just whispered, "Thank you." Not to the hospital, not to the nurse, but to the man he helped when he had nothing to give, and who now gave him everything in return. Hours passed. The surgery went well. Jalen was stable. And just as the sun began to rise, casting a pale golden glow through the waiting room window, a man walked in. Same build. A little older now. Hair grayer. But those eyes. Calvin remembered those eyes. The stranger walked up slowly. "I wasn't sure if you'd remember me." "Hard to forget a man you meet in a thunderstorm," Calvin said, his voice cracking. They stood there for a long moment. Two men. Two fathers. Two lives bound by a single moment neither of them saw coming. "You saved me when I was lost," the man said. "You didn't ask for anything. But I've carried that moment with me every single day." Calvin reached out, hand trembling. They shook hands, and then pulled each other into an embrace. Not of strangers. Not even of friends. But of men who knew what it meant to be broken. And still choose kindness. The soft beep of the heart monitor was the only sound in the room. Jalen lay still, pale against the crisp white hospital sheets. His face was bruised, his arm in a sling, but he was alive. Breathing. Healing. Calvin sat beside him, eyes fixed on his son's face, holding his hand like it was the last anchor keeping him from drifting away. He hadn't slept. Hadn't eaten. But in that moment, he didn't need anything but this. His son's pulse, and a silent prayer of gratitude. A quiet knock came at the door. Calvin turned, and there he was, the man from the rain. He wasn't wearing a suit now. No pretense. No distance. Just jeans, a plain shirt, and eyes that still carried the weight of storms past. He stepped in gently. "I didn't want to leave without seeing him," he said. Calvin nodded. "You saved his life." The man looked down, hands in his pockets. "You saved mine first." He walked over to the foot of the bed and looked at Jalen. Really looked at him. "He reminds me of my own son. That same fire. That same heart." There was silence. Not awkward. Not heavy. Just full. Like the kind of quiet that speaks louder than words ever could. Calvin leaned back in the chair, finally allowing himself to breathe. "You didn't have to do what you did. You didn't owe me anything. The man shook his head slowly. That night, you didn't know who I was. You didn't ask for anything. You just helped me when I felt invisible. He looked up, eyes glassy. That act, it changed something in me. I became a better man because of you. I built a better life. And now, I just wanted to pass it forward. Jalen stirred. His fingers twitched around Calvin's hand. Then, his eyes opened. Slow, dazed, blinking against the light. Dad! Calvin stood up so fast he nearly knocked over the chair. I'm here, son. I'm right here. Jalen looked at the man standing near the window. Who's that? Calvin smiled, tears slipping down his face. That is someone who believes in kindness as much as I do. The stranger gave a small wave. Good to see you awake, Jalen. The world still needs you. Jalen nodded slowly, not fully understanding, but somehow knowing. This man mattered. Just like his dad had always said. One day, the good you give will find its way back to you. And now, it had. They never exchanged more than a few words after that. The man left quietly the next morning. No cameras, no parade. Just a note left on the nightstand that read, "Tell your son to live loud. The world always needs more light." Calvin folded that note and kept it in his wallet, right next to the photo of Jalen's first day of kindergarten. Jalen recovered slowly. He went back to school, started speaking at youth conferences about perseverance and fatherhood and gratitude. Not because anyone told him to, but because he'd lived it. He carried that story like a torch, never forgetting the man who saved him, never forgetting the other man who made that moment possible. His father. Calvin never saw himself as a hero. He was just a man doing his best, showing up, loving hard, giving when it hurt. But in a world where people rush past pain, he stopped, he saw, he cared. And that single moment, under heavy rain, with no umbrella, and no reason to say yes, saved a life. Twice. We often think the world is changed by big things, by loud speeches, or famous names, or massive movements. But sometimes, the world shifts, because one tired man pulled over in the rain, and helped someone he didn't know, for no other reason than because it was the right thing to do. If this story touched you, if it reminded you that your kindness might matter more than you'll ever know, leave a comment below. Have you ever helped someone and wondered if it made a difference? Subscribe to SoulTwist Stories, where every small act reveals a bigger truth. Turn on notifications so you never miss a story that reminds you. Love comes back. Goodness echoes. And strangers sometimes become our salvation.